What does one learn from being exposed to the wealthy? I've worked with the very wealthy and the very poor. I have learned that money makes you more of whatever you are. People who are kind and generous are kind and generous on a larger scale. People who are jerks become jerks on a bigger scale. Money doesn't change people, it just helps them be who they really are. If you can afford 20 grand for a shower sauna combo with like 4 different types of shower heads like say MD a radio in it, buy it. Best freaking shower of my life. Spent like an hour in that thing. This actually sounds really cool, haha. I had a friend whose dad developed some offshore gambling app when we were younger. It circumvented a bunch of online gambling laws in the US. He made a stupid amount of money from running it, and my friend, his dad and his brother all lived in this mansion. This was a shock to me though. This kid was in Billabong hoodies and jeans every day, was in public school like me and just loved PC gaming. When I met his dad and brother, they were the same way, hoodies, jeans, just chill people. Didn't even seem to realize or care about the money. I'm working with a guy that owns an extraordinary number of houses, land and a couple of mansions. I soon realized he has everything and no time to enjoy it. I've worked for a few insanely rich people and they aren't just pursuing a lifestyle, more than anything they enjoy making money and would literally die of boredom if they stopped. Some can be down to earth, but I've seen more that are out of touch with reality or straight up rude. There's a guy that owns half the town where I live, super down to earth and funds and sponsors a lot of stuff for the local school district. He is cheap at times when it comes to the bowling alley he owns, but he is a decent person. Former family friend who is a realtor, multi-millionaire, completely ghosted my family when he learned we weren't as rich as he thought we were. When my parents revealed that the house we had was being foreclosed on due to some crappy life stuff, he basically disappeared. Came by twice when we were selling what we could and wanted to buy the air hockey table we had. $5. That's all it was being sold for since we couldn't take it with us with where we were moving to. He told us that was too much money to spend on it and left. Came back the next day with his daughter and grandson and saw we marked it free and took it whole, acting like he was doing us a favor. My brother and I are friends with a guy whose dad is the CEO of a big company, and let me tell you, his dad is the most chill, down-to-earth man I have ever met. You could literally call him the worst slang on the planet and he'd responds with okay and is incredibly patient with people. That you can be cash flow rich and balance sheet poor. That becoming wealthy isn't as much about massive income as it is about consistent saving and investing over time. That acting rich generally means you're poor or soon to be. The few real folks among them will tell you how lucky, fortunate they are to be wealthy. They realize that many folks have brilliant ideas, many folks work hard and aren't. Survivorship bias. I worked real hard and now I'm wealthy. You must be lazy. Hard work and opportunity and luck is what makes most people successful. Most people only have one of those three things. I've met all sorts of rich dudes from chill to narcissistic as frick. The two biggest standouts were Mr. B, who was by far the richest I've personally known, over $250 million. He lived in a home you'd expect a doctor to own. He drove a Lexus car that was 8 years old. He spent most of his time with his family. Mr. B was very kind and very humble about how he made his fortune. Mr. K worked at McDonald's, but he also owned a lot of them. Mr. K worked 5 days a week rotating through his McDonald's. And I mean worked. Toilets, trash, register, drive-through, everything. He loved people and wanted everyone to have a good experience at his stores. He was a master at communicating. If you met him, you'd have no idea he was incredibly wealthy. He was great at making his entire focus you when he was interacting with you. Very kind-hearted man. Both Mr. B and Mr. K have passed away. Neither left massive fortunes for their kids. Both left trusts that paid for education, but that's it. The rest they donated to charities. Never met someone who owned multiple McDonald's who didn't love it. They are a strange breed of people. That is for sure. In a good way. And yeah, also a very comfortable $600-700k a year. Plus, to get to that point you generally need to be the kind of person who puts 70-80% of your take-home pay into investing. Old book, but read The Millionaire Next Door. People think they can spot the rich guy based on stereotypes. I know very rich people who drive old cars, shop at thrift shops, donate regularly, anonymously. They don't flaunt their wealth. They run in different circles, business people and high finance plus those much further down the financial ladder. The best lesson I've learned from those I respect is to treat everyone with respect no matter their background. My parents would always warn me our neighbors were not rich, but deep in debt. They gave their kids everything, always had brand new things and acted rich. They went broke in the early zeros and lost it all. Everybody has their own set of problems. In my experience, when money isn't a problem, some other typically foolish thing fills its place. Except it's that you consider those problems foolish, while they can be actually pretty important things for everyone. It's just that you don't have time for thighs cause you're busy surviving. That money doesn't change who you are, it just makes it come out more. Nice people are more giving and buttholes become bigger ones. Just how comfortable an existence life with financial security is. While many poor people are grinding every day knowing any little mistake or piece of dumb luck can completely ruin their finances, rich people go to bed easy every night knowing how secure they are. That's why I want to get wealthy in my lifetime. Not to have an extravagant lifestyle or run with the high rollers, but to just go to bed every night not worrying about losing any one source of my income. Some of them really love the arts and humanities on a levels that is on equal footing with the artists and the humans themselves. I think that poorer people do too. They just can't afford to go to shows and buy paintings. Some of them are the chillest, nicest people you will ever meet, and some are the meanest, cruelest buttholes you will ever meet. Almost sounds like they are all just people. Grew up in a working class neighborhood, Section 8 housing. None of my friends' parents had college degrees, including my own. Never really exposed to even upper middle class people growing up. Went to college, married someone several rings up the ladder from me. Most of her family are millionaires. Now live in a neighborhood with a lot of rich people. My conclusion: you should really judge the individual and not lump large groups of people together with some sweeping broad characterization of an entire class. Some rich people are buttholes. Some are really cool. Some are generous. Some are not. Some have crazy political views, while others don't. Some worked really hard while others haven't worked a day in their life. Some are super entitled and others realize how super fortunate they are. And you know what? You could apply all that to poor people. Not how much they have, but just how little you have. They put no thought into buying a $1,500 espresso maker that they never use because Starbucks is easier. But for me, Starbucks is an expensive treat. Or, hey, come check out my new 150 inches TV in my theater room. And I go home to my studio at a 19 inches TV with rabbit ears, because I can't afford cable. They just don't understand the disparity. The owner's kids came into the office one day and I overheard one of his girls tell a woman in the office, "You work for my daddy, right?" Woman responded in the affirmative. Little girl says, "My daddy owns this company, right?" Woman responds in the affirmative. Little girl says, "Well, since you work for my daddy, and he owns this business, he said we own this business, so that means I own you." That little girl didn't know how close she was to meeting Jesus that day, or another time. Same little girl, "My daddy says we have $3 million in the bank," walks away. I've been poor and I've been rich. Rich is better, on the whole. Wealthy people are not any different. They just have less money related stress and can pay for services to free up their time. This frees up energy to focus on other things, like learning or paying people to turn their money into more money. As you rub shoulders and make personal connections, opportunities will sometimes present themselves for investments, like real estate before it's listed or investing in new ventures businesses. The key is to maximize earnings, create multiple revenue streams, and live way below your means. You need the money to take advantage of investments. Gotta have means before you can live below M. Money does not equal happiness. I went to a private high school with insanely rich students and they were mostly miserable. A huge percentage of kids had eating disorders, drug issues, alcohol issues, and no concept of the real world. There are two types of rich people. extremely generous who are happy to pay for things that afford them time to do what they enjoy, and the really stingy who take advantage of others for their personal gain. I worked in a lowly job and offered to get my boss a soda. There was rich dude in his office who said he'd take one too. I assumed he'd pay me when I got back, but he didn't. Guys, was and forever will be a jerk in my book. I work very closely with a billionaire. He's not flashy and is overly careful with money to the point that sometimes it's short-sighted, because everyone is always telling him what he wants to hear. He often has the illusion of being right much more than he actually is, but no one argues with him. Most of the time he is the smartest person in the room. However, he will drop into something complex that a bunch of people are working on and give his opinion from 30,000 feet. This causes frustration and problems that he isn't even aware of. Good guy though, and I enjoy our friendship. He is extremely smart and oftentimes is prescient about potential outcomes way before everyone else picks up on things. Money seems to follow him. Like whatever he touches turns to gold. The best way to avoid paying taxes is to have no official income. Pay yourself a salary of $1 a year and leverage your stock value for loans. I don't think you need to be rich for this. Yes, to do this entirely you need to be wealthy, but even people that are not rich can do this. Investing in your 401k to reduce your taxable income and maximizing your HSA are the two most common ways ordinary people can do it. A lot of people who appear wealthy are actually in massive debt. The people who are often super well off or can retire early are that wealthy because they are frugal, whereas a lot of the very overtly wealthy people you meet, unless we are talking clearly from old money or famous, are sustaining that lifestyle through not saving and using credit. A lot of wealthy people are also just so uninterested in helping anyone. When I was down and out, the people who helped me were almost entirely working class or lower middle class. The people I knew who actually had the resources to help suddenly disappeared. I think that it's important to note that many self-made wealthy people are inundated with requests for money and business opportunities constantly. Many wealthy people are jaded towards personal charity because it usually leads to 10x as many people asking for handouts. The majority of these same people donate tons of money more anonymously to charities that they care about. How unsatisfied they are. In middle school my best friend lived in a cute little 2-bedroom brick home. I lived in a double wide trailer. I was always jealous that she lived in a real house in a real neighborhood. She came over for a sleepover once and complained that her room was smaller than mine even though I lived in a trailer. She said trailer like it was a slur. Meanwhile, I was always so jealous of her home. She came from a very humble working class family. They weren't made of money, but compared to my family they were rich. I'm the 6th of 7 kids. There's almost a directly inverse correlation to the amount of money we make to the happiness levels we have. We all grew up poor. Katie, 40, oldest sibling, has tens of millions of dollars and still makes millions a year. She's extremely stressed all the time, has a terrible marriage, physically and mentally unhealthy, and super concerned about Democrats being out to get her and steal her money to give to lazy people. Aaron, 34, and his wife together make just under $150k yearly in our small hometown where the median salary is under $30k. They're drowning in debt and terrible at finances, something that a constant stress for them. Davey, Nathan, and Luke all make middle class wages and live good middle class lives. Mika, 31, and I, 27, both quit our jobs to pursue the arts. Music and myself photography. We're easily the two happiest, stress-free brothers, and by far we make the least amount of money. I'd be curious to see this same breakdown as written by each sibling. Mostly I've learned they can make moral or ethical stands because there is no consequences. Unhappy at a job and think they are wrong? Just quit. No true repercussions for doing so. Knew a guy who argued that staying somewhere you felt they were ethically or morally corrupt was a choice and he had walked out of a job because of it. But he could move back home. Just a little ego bruise. He had his wealthy parents. He had access to borrowed money. Like there was no connection between his access to not fail vs actually failing on his stance, or taking his immediate family down with him. He was never sacrificing his home, his auto, his family, nothing except he put his foot down and might have to hang out with his parents. but he was willing to risk it. It was really eye-opening to me. No fear of repercussions except mom and dad would have to help. To have that kind of security, there is a huge disconnect between them understanding they worked for it when they come from money, like understanding the access they are privy to, and being in the situational awareness of it is not a comprehension they have. Doesn't everyone have a choice to just walk away from their income and not face eviction? Medical access, vehicle, food access, childcare, etc. How silly. You just have no conviction to stand by your morals. It honestly made me a little sick. And please understand, I don't think these are bad people. I respect the people I do know who are wealthy quite deeply, but there's a flaw in reasoning that was, and still is, a bit flabbergasting to me personally. This is why a lot of Greenpeace, Extinction Rebellion, etc. are typically middle class and up people. They're the only ones who can actually afford to be there. Most working people can't take time off to protest about stuff because they have bills to pay and kids to feed. It's easy to protest for what you believe when you aren't living month to month. Even the moderately wealthy, like barely upper middle class, have a guy for everything. Somehow. And not just a sketchy guy, but a tailored professional. Maybe they bump into each other at country clubs and form reciprocal agreements. IDK. But it results in suitably wealthy people getting the highest quality service on everything for a family and friends discount. You have money equals you save money equals you get more money. This isn't a positive or a negative. A related note is that nothing seems too small to get the expensive treatment. This can foster both awful people who insist on others making massive adjustments to make that happen, and lovely people who will put in their money, time, effort to do a good job for poorer friends just because they value something done to good standards and like to see it. What the people are like is very individual. This one is just plain old networking and isn't socioeconomic dependent. When I was making $30K a year, I had a guy for everything. Even now that I'm better off, I still have many of the same guys I did before. I grew up in a wealthy area. My parents were definitely very well off, but we were never anything close to being part of the 1%, and in my experience, the wealthy are very polarized. There are those who genuinely want to do good things and use their money and influence to help people. On the flip side, there are those who are incredibly selfish and self-serving. Both sides can be very arrogant. However, this arrogance is usually for different reasons, but it still comes through nonetheless. The worst, however, aren't the wealthy adults, but the kids of said wealthy adults. These shats are unbelievably egotistical and think they can do anything and say anything they want because their parents are rich. Like said, I grew up in a wealthy area, and because of that, I went to a wealthy high school, so I was forced to endure these shitheads for years. Maybe you think I'm exaggerating a bit. Okay, here's an example. Their parents bought these kids luxury or sports cars for their first car. Seriously, I saw 16-year-olds driving Mercedes, BMW, Lexus, etc. I also said my parents were well off, and because it was my first car, they felt I didn't need something overly powerful or flashy. They got me a Honda Civic. I was ridiculed constantly for driving a poor loser's car. The fact that my parents bought me a car at all was pretty dang good, but I guess these kids felt they deserved whatever their parents got them. The funny thing is, I mentioned this to my dad years later and he was actually apologetic. I told him he didn't need to be. I was a brand new driver and the last thing I needed was a high-end, powerful vehicle that I could get myself into real trouble with. Another story, also relating to cars, was a kid who wrote an editorial in the school newspaper, where he did nothing but be and moan about how put out he was because had to be seen in a rented Chevy Geo because his real car was in the shop. What made this particular article even more tone deaf was that the teachers in the school all had less expensive cars than the students, including the vehicle this student was complaining about. This sounds like my school. The teacher's parking lot was filled with older, modest cars while the student parking lot was ridiculous. Of course, many a shat made fun of the teacher's cars. So gross. I cater in Orange County, Southern California. The ones who made their own money are usually very generous. The ones who inherited it or married into it are greedy, needy and whiny, and are out of touch with the real world. 1. They ain't that smart but they get crap done regardless of how stupid and unprofessional they look. 2. Being in a wealthy environment and making acquaintances will expand your horizons. There are people out there that are making bank, just as there are PhD students, neurosurgeons, junkies, etc. I interned at a luxury car dealership in 2015-2016 and me, a non-native speaker, was proofreading their emails. God, were they bad. Doing basic Excel for invoicing. No SEO. They even had the wrong name on their Google business page. I went in there thinking I was interviewing at Weissman. I was not. In the 90s they were making close to 100 million revenue per annum. In 2009 they went bankrupt and a couple of years later they reincorporated. The managing director at one point held the record for most Bugattis sold, 7 BTW, and they held some record for most Rolls Royces sold as well. Word to the ones that want to get rich, get started now. Exude confidence, learn on the job and don't be afraid of making mistakes or of how stupid you may look. This is so interesting. Thank you for sharing. That financial wealth is not necessarily a source of happiness, but happiness is a sign of mental wealth regardless of financial standing. Recently started a job moving rich people out of houses, and I learned they are some of the pettiest people ever, especially their spouses who did nothing but got everything. The total balance in the bank account doesn't matter so much as an ability to speak the language and pick up on all the subtle social cues, knowing the right places to vacation, and how to host a tasteful dinner party, having friends who went to the right schools and summer camps. It's usually not about luxury cars and watches. Oftentimes, the wealthy don't spend that much more on these things than the rest of us. They just know how to do them the right way. Social capital, absolutely. Indiscreet materialism is considered gauche among the ranks of old money. I was raised poor. I am now secure, but the damage that poverty does to children still forces me to think as a poor man. Every one of them had a lucky break somewhere in life to reach their level of wealth. Even those that worked their butt off to get where they are had some luck involved. Spent a lot of time among them in my career. They were smart. They worked hard. Didn't waste time, but when they played big. Having grown up poor and marrying someone with several very wealthy friends and family members, they are seriously some of the nicest and most generous people I have ever met. I'm sure this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I haven't met a mean or selfish wealthy person. Who you know goes a lot farther than what you know. Something I learned going to a very gossip girls-esque high school. Good credit is the basis of most of their wealth. They got a loan and did something with it, and then took out another one when the first one was paid off. They always have something building credit. That's for people who made their own wealth. Second and third gen rich people have no freaking clue how money is made. It's just something that ends up in their bank account. The wealthiest people I know were completely self-made. They treated every single staff member, waiter, sales rep, etc. with the utmost kindness and courtesy. Always a please and thank you with excellent manners. They adopted me when I was in my early 20s and basically I got to live an insane life. I learned so much. I grew up relatively upper class. Parents work downtown in skyscrapers. Good school, new car at 16 etc. While my wife grew up pretty poor. When we first met it baffled me that she had to get a job while in college and that college wasn't her job. Her parents cut her off when she left because they were no longer her responsibility. Some other things I noticed is she would and still does look up a menu before we go somewhere to see if we can afford it. We both have good jobs and can afford pretty much anything we want. Just a quirk she has kept since childhood. Another thing I noticed is she only buys her clothes when they are on sale. While I have picked up that habit because it's genius, you wouldn't catch my mother dead before she used coupons or bought something on sale. We've both explained to her the quality doesn't change with a sale but she's set in her ways. My uncle married into a super rich, own a major company, family and man I've seen some crazy crap. An example I always bring up is one of her nephews had a birthday and they brought the literal carnival to her parking lot. Like a straight up carnival. It was wild to me. That if they grew up rich they have no freaking clue the day-to-day issues regular PPL deal with. They have no clue that some PPL go to grocery store with a budget and look at price of everything. Honestly they are clueless to what real life is on planet Earth. I had a custom furniture business for about 8 years and we designed and built for some exclusive clients. I eventually learned that they really seem to appreciate when someone treats them as just another human. I grew up in a family of very modest means. I never thought we were poor at the time, though I later learned that we were borderline. I got a summer job as a caddy at a swanky and exclusive country club. I caddied for a lot on wealthy businessmen, lawyers, doctors and even one US senator. I learned that the proportion of good wealthy people to mean wealthy people was pretty much the same as good to mean poor people. I learned that the spread of smart wealthy people to stupid wealthy people was more extreme than smart to stupid poor people, meaning that the smart wealthy people were really smart. The stupid ones were relying on inheritance and family for their wealth, and there seemed to be much fewer wealthy people that were of average intelligence. The biggest thing I learned was that smart and good wealthy people would honestly do their best to help you out if you show them you weren't just asking for a handout. Now that I think about it, there were a few good people I caddied for that I still remember getting good advice from, even though it was over 45 years ago. For your information, the senator was not one of the good ones, but I'll leave at that, since he is long gone. Being exposed to wealthy people means being exposed to money-making ideas habits. There is a different mindset that people with wealth have. A friend of mine had a pancake souffle business that went bust. Not a big deal as they were already very wealthy, but they had this idea of taking the ice cream machine from the store and make artisanal soft serve. It's doing pretty well. Much better than the original business. Point is, wealthy people can see opportunities easily because they don't have to worry about their basic needs. Perhaps people who are not as wealthy would have sold everything instead of risking on another business. Learn from the wealthy and build your wealth. This is what I have learned. Wealthy people are just people who took the risk and succeeded. We can complain about not having rich parents, but most people with wealth earned it on their own. Holy crap, well, I went to a school in a very wealthy area, me growing up in a pretty poor place, and I learned in my second day school years that rich kids have no comprehension of life outside of wealth. I used to get picked on for the clothes I wore, the way I couldn't get lunch some days, and the main one was coming into school with greasy hair specifically. It got to a point where I had to explain to my entire form that my family had little money and that we had gas and electric meters. Obviously no one even knew what a meter was, but to my surprise, after explaining life from a poor background, a lot of people actually started to understand and the comments died off. If any of you are parents and have an abundance of wealth, I beg you teach your children about people from all walks of life. Will save many kids hassle, and it's worth understanding different backgrounds and cultures. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.